Have you ever found yourself wondering why you react a certain way, or why some patterns just seem to keep repeating in your life no matter what you do? Well, a lot of the time the answers aren't really in our present, but deep in our past. Today, we're going to explore how our earliest experiences create this sort of unseen blueprint that shapes our entire adult world, our health, our thoughts, our relationships, in ways we might not even see.
And this quote right here, it just gets to the very heart of it. See, childhood trauma isn't just about having bad memories. It's a fundamental wiring process. A child's experiences, they don't just fade away. They literally become the foundation of the adult they grow into, sculpting their brain, their nervous system, and even their sense of self. And that idea, it's the key to understanding everything else we're about to talk about.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at this unseen blueprint itself. Then we'll dive into the body's survival system and how it remembers. After that, we'll get into our learned ways of being, basically the mind's adaptations. Then we'll see how all of this impacts the way we connect with people. And finally, and this is the important part, we'll map out a path forward.
All right, so let's start with this core concept. I want you to imagine a child growing up in an environment that feels unstable or scary or just unpredictable. Their little system doesn't have the luxury of focusing on things like learning or playing or connecting. Nope, its number one job, its only job really, becomes survival. And this intense focus on just staying safe, it becomes the default setting, the basic operating system that gets carried right into adulthood.
So how in the world does this actually happen? Well, it all starts with our biology. This isn't just in your head, it's a physical thing. Trauma literally rewires the brain and the nervous system to be on high alert for threats. The body, in a very, very real way, remembers the danger, even when the conscious mind has pushed the memories away.
And this right here explains the why behind so many of those adult reactions that feel so confusing. When a kid is exposed to repeated stress, their internal alarm system just becomes incredibly sensitive. That fight or flight response, which is supposed to be for brief, life-threatening moments, it gets stuck in the on position. And listen, this isn't a choice. It's a biological adaptation to a world that felt constantly unsafe.
And this constant state of alarm doesn't just look one way. It often shows up as this wild swing between two extremes. On one side, you've got hyperarousal, that feeling of anxiety, irritability, being constantly on edge. But on the other side, you have shutdown, feeling totally numb, exhausted, disconnected, just empty. As an adult, you might find yourself bouncing between these two poles, feeling totally wired one minute and completely drained the next, with no obvious reason why.
And of course, this constant stress isn't just in your head. It takes a huge physical toll. When your nervous system is always revved out, that emotional strain from the past starts to show up as real physical symptoms in the present. We're talking about things like sleep problems, chronic fatigue, muscle tension, headaches, even digestive issues. The body is literally carrying the score.
Okay, so we've talked about the body's hardware. Now let's shift gears and talk about the mind's software. You know, the emotional and cognitive patterns that get built right on top of this highly sensitive nervous system. These are the clever adaptations the mind comes up with to try and navigate a world that feels really dangerous.
A huge theme here is shame. But we're not talking about just feeling embarrassed. No, this is a deep, often unconscious belief that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It's this feeling that you're not safe, or not valued, or just not enough. This belief doesn't usually shout. It whispers in the background, influencing pretty much every decision you make and what you think you deserve out of life.
And running on that feeling of shame, the mind itself becomes a kind of threat detection machine. It's always scanning the horizon for danger. This is exactly why someone might read way too much into a simple text message, or look for hidden criticism in a compliment, or just automatically assume they're to blame for things that have nothing to do with them. It is an exhausting way to live, but it's a learned strategy for trying to stay one step ahead of getting hurt. Now, this is so important to understand. These behaviors, they aren't character flaws. They are brilliant, even if they're now outdated, survival strategies. People-pleasing to keep the peace. Perfectionism to avoid being criticized. Trying to control everything to manage a world that feels out of control. These were all ways a child tried to stay safe. But in adulthood, these same strategies can end up holding us back.
Now let's talk about maybe the most profound area this blueprint affects, our relationships. I mean, our earliest connections with our caregivers, they literally teach us what to expect from other people. They set the template for how we give and receive love, how we trust, and how we find support for the rest of our lives.
Think about it like this. If the very people who were supposed to be your safe harbor were instead a source of fear or unpredictability, then your internal model for relationships becomes fundamentally unstable. Trust doesn't come easy. The expectation of safety and consistency just isn't there because all your earliest data points taught you that connection could actually be dangerous.
So let's get a little more specific. What happens if the love and attention you got as a kid was just all over the place? Sometimes it was there and sometimes it just wasn't. What does that kind of experience create in an adult?
Well, it creates an adult who is constantly on the lookout for signs that you're about to be left. Someone who's hyper-aware of every little shift in someone's mood, who lives with this deep, gut-level fear of abandonment. They might overreact to what seems like a little bit of distance from a partner or a friend. They've learned that love can vanish in a heartbeat, so they are always, always watching for the exit.
Okay, now for a different question. What if it wasn't about inconsistency, but about absence? What if, as a child, you were basically taught that your feelings just didn't matter, that they were an inconvenience, or silly, or just plain wrong?
That childhood experience often leads to an adult who has a really hard time even knowing what they're feeling. They might feel this sense of emptiness or just disconnection. They learn to downplay their own needs because they were taught they weren't important. They might look for validation from others, but even when they get it, it doesn't quite land because the core belief is that their inner world just isn't valid.
I know. After all of that, this topic can feel really heavy. But this is the most important part of our whole conversation. That blueprint we've been talking about, it is not carved in stone. It was drawn in pencil, and it can absolutely be redrawn. So let's talk about the path forward.
Please, remember this. These patterns, these reactions, these beliefs, they are what you learn to survive. They are not the unchangeable truth of who you are. Thanks to this amazing thing called neuroplasticity, our brains can create new pathways at any age. Change is not just a nice idea, it is fundamentally possible.
So, what does that change actually look like? Well, it's a process, and it usually focuses on these core areas. It starts with the body, learning how to regulate that sensitized nervous system so you can feel safe again. It involves doing the work of identifying and challenging those old, shame-based beliefs. It means learning the language of your own emotions, building and practicing boundaries, and consciously choosing relationships that feel safe, not just familiar. This is the work of redrawing the map.
So, we'll end on this thought. Your past may have written the first draft of your adult life, for sure. But it is only a draft. The power to pick up the pen, to revise, to edit, and to write a brand new chapter always, always remains with you. The only question is, who's going to write your next one?